I just realised how zen that music is. I feel quite chilled now. Welcome to 21st Century Saints, our podcasts and live stream series for members and those affiliated with those who, I don't know, hang around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here in the United Kingdom and around the world. We've got Sarah, our co-host in the house. Do you want to say hey?
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here.
Have you been up to anything good this week?
Do you know, I've had a fantastic this week. I've been hanging out with people from another faith community, and it's been cool and it's been most awesome. And then went and hung out with some friends and stayed with them for a while and walked and went and protested at a wind farm turbine thing and kind of said, hey, no, this is not good. And had a really generally very, very good time.
You're such a badass. I love it.
Badass.
Um, and we also have Ruth Heath in the house, the darling of the Brit Avengers. How are you doing, Ruth? What have you been up to?
Well, even better now you've said nice things like that. I'm just working, life, family, all the usual. All good.
Awesome. And of course, we have with us in the studio tonight our dear friend Nemo the Mormon. Do you want to say hey?
Hi, I'm a bit sad that Ruth stole my title as Darling of the Avengers, if I'm honest.
I'm not even sorry. What have you been up to? Anything good?
Not a lot really. I just got back from Switzerland, where I've been making doing Thrive events, making a film, which will be, it'll be a little short film that will come out on the channel. And I also walked across an entire country while I was out there answering people's questions. So watch out for that video as well. That's what I've been up to.
Looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, before we jump in, announcements. Is there anything that we need to? Sarah, do you want to tell people about the survey before we kick off?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of responses to this survey. The numbers are really racking up now. We're getting, at one point there were more responses from men than women, which we were really interested in. Now we're seeing there's slightly more responses from women than men, but it's incredibly interesting to see what people have to say, and we are so grateful for the courage and the confidence people have to trust us that we're going to keep that information confidential and only use it in a way that can push the church to greater and more responsibility around safeguarding and to understand better the level of need that we have out there. I think it's brilliant. If you can go onto the survey, please go onto it, fill it in, send it in, share. If it's safe and feels okay for you to do so, share. It's really important.
Absolutely. We've already been able to identify clusters of areas of concern. So even if you have just witnessed something or you're aware of something having happened, it is really useful to get that information. So if you would consider sharing that with us, we would be very, very grateful. Okay, other announcements. We also this weekend, conference weekend, practice self-care. You all know this by now. If it's the time to stay off social media, and not in a creepy, don't go on social media church fast suggestion, but you might want to just maybe mute certain topics on Twitter is a good way to practice self-care. We are going to be talking. I'm going to be over with Priesthood Dispatches tomorrow night, along with the rest of the Brit Avengers, Nemo, Mormon Civil Wars, Peter Bleakley, and Priesthood Dispatches. And we're going to be talking about our conference predictions. What else have we got? This Sunday, we're going to be over with you, Nemo, talking about the Sunday morning session of conference.
Yeah.
Nemo's lineup for the conference reviews is so good. You're going to love this. What else? And next week, we've got David Osler, who is... Sorry, Sarah, jump in.
Just hold on, Jan. I know you're really excited about David Osler, but you have to wait next. Well, I'm sorry, you're not getting him next week. You have to wait another week. We get David Osler on the 12th of April. Next week, on the 5th of April, we're having some time to do a bit of a conference debrief and therapy. A little bit of a chat about where's conference been for us, what's been the good, what's been the bad. Did any of our predictions come true? That's what we need to look at. And bit of self-care for those of us that may have struggled with various things.
Maybe we're all going to get the priesthood and we'll be really busy being ordained that week.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got lots, and David Osler is coming up. We're going to have a guest host joining us for that conversation. So we're really excited. We've got lots coming up. We want to jump in tonight talking about voting opposed, the sustaining of church leaders, and we have a bit of a background in talking about this subject here on 21st Century Saints because our friend Alana voted opposed at her state conference earlier on in 2022. Um, I held her hand and voted sustain while she voted oppose, and we had some pretty incredible experiences around that. It was really supportive. But Nemo, you kind of kicked off the social media buzz around voting oppose. You maybe want to, for those of us who, those of our audience who aren't members of the church, do you want to talk a little bit about what voting is supposed to be? Why do we
Sure.
vote?
So when people are put in positions within the church, when they're called to do a certain job or a certain role, there is an opportunity for the members of the church to sustain them. And that delineates depending on how much their role affects the church. So if it's a local leader, then the local people will sustain them. If it's a slightly bigger one, like a stake or a diocese sort of level, then that's where you get, at that larger conference, you get sustaining votes. But at all of these conferences, these sustaining votes are done for the senior brethren of the church. So the quorum of the 15, as they're often known, so the 12 apostles and the first presidency, so 15 people in total. They are sustained, and you, by sustaining, what you're doing is you're saying that you support them. You have no reason to think that they shouldn't be doing that role, and so you can support them in that role, and you will, give what you can to help them succeed in that role. And what happens is after the sustaining vote has been called for, there is an opportunity for those who oppose to also offer that vote. Because if someone knows a reason why that person shouldn't be in that calling, much in the same way as kind of at a wedding, if anyone knows a reason why these people shouldn't be getting married, please let us know. Same principle. And so you vote opposed, you raise your hand in the same way. Sometimes you have to stand or even have to vocalize it to make sure that vote is acknowledged, because opposing votes are very rare, or at least they used to be. They're getting more common now. I may have something to do with that, but they're becoming more common, and so hopefully we're desensitizing people to them. But they're a big deal. When an opposing vote happens, it's a big deal. Some people have never seen one before. We're used to just this unanimous vote of yes, I support these brethren. In fact, if you go back to the 2014 documentary Meet the Mormons, the one that was done by Lynn Alloway on Channel 4, one of the shots they show that kind of doesn't always paint the church in a great light is people all raising their right hand to sustain at the same time. You see the conference center, 22,000 people all going like this at the same time as part of the sustaining vote. So it's a big uniting thing that members do together to say, yes, we support the leaders of the church. Hope that explains it.
Actually always had been my favourite part of conference, even at a ward or stake level. Having that opportunity was something that I still take very, very seriously, and we're going to get into that a little bit. Ruth, tell me about, had you ever seen anyone vote opposed? Is it common here in the UK?
I think I do remember at a state conference somebody voting opposed, and there being lots of hushed, sort of disgruntled murmurings. And I have to be brutally honest. When I was Mormon, when I was active, when I was a believing member, if somebody had voted opposed, putting my 5 years, 10 years ago head on, I would have thought you're just being contrary. Just, if you don't like it, you don't have to come. That's how you can, you don't have to play by this game if you don't want to. Now, when I think about voting opposed, I feel entirely different about it, completely different. And I actually think it is the last hope for the faithful believing members. It's their last chance to actually trust the system, because when you believe in a process of repentance, you offer that as an opportunity for somebody who perhaps shouldn't be in that position of authority or position of responsibility to go through that repentance process, because you know something. You're not gonna out them in front of everybody, but you know something serious enough about how they've behaved themselves that you feel that they should go through that process so that they can draw close to their Heavenly Father and all the rest of it. And so I really feel now embarrassed for my believing self that would have sneered at somebody who was voting opposed, but also how very, very brave are people who do vote opposed, because I think it's their way of saying, I trust this system. Please, please, please don't prove me wrong. Please, please, please let this count for something, and let the system work as it's supposed to work. And
So what brought you, tell us the story of your voting opposed. What was it like the first time, but most importantly, what brought you to the point where you chose to do it?
Well, I started off realizing that they're lying to us. The members of the Quorum of the 12, the First Presidency, are lying to us. And I know there's believing members that watch this podcast, and that's a very bold statement to make. And what I thought would happen is, okay, I'll vote opposed because I have reason to believe that a proportion of them are not being honest. And so what I did is I took that then to my state president, as you do, because then you get a chance to speak with them. And I was trying to get a temple recommend, and I couldn't get a temple recommend because I couldn't sustain them for these same reasons. So in trying to reconcile that, I got a chance to meet with my state president, and that's normally where opposition to the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 stops, is with the state president. But what I did was I pushed it a bit further. I've done a whole episode on this. I won't go into it all now, but I pushed a bit harder. I managed to escalate my concerns past them to the area presidency, and then up to the First Presidency through a little bit of ingenuity on my part, should we say. And then I got a response from Dallin H. Oakes. He doesn't have any answers to my reasons for opposing him. And so I'm now stuck in a position where no one can resolve the things that no one can give a satisfactory answer, or an answer at all, particularly to why it's okay for them to be lying, or whether they're lying or not, even in that position. And so we're in a position where they probably shouldn't be in that calling anymore because they're lying, or no one's given a good enough reason why that's okay for them to be lying in that position still. So that's what led me to it, and that's kind of how I rambled along with it.
And I'm going to follow up with you about
go on.
that, but could you maybe talk a little bit? Why do you think? Could you maybe summarize what your reasons were saying lying would?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, they were saying things in their position as prophets, seers, and revelators, which is what we're sustaining them as. So it wasn't that they were saying untrue things to their mate over the garden fence. It was when they were in a suit and tie at an official church function, representing the church as a prophet, seer, and revelator, which is the position we were sustaining them as every time you're asked to sustain them. They were saying things that weren't honest, such as Jeffrey R. Holland was talking about double-digit growth within the church that just wasn't happening. He was talking about the church not spending 1 red cent on Proposition 8. Again, untrue. You've got Russell M. Nelson lying about the plane of death story. You've got Dan H. Oakes lying about electroshock conversion therapy. You know, the list goes on, but there's these things they were saying, not just behind the scenes, but in their official capacity as prophets, seers, and revelators. And so if they're saying that in that position, I can't sustain them in that role, because while they were in that role, they were lying.
What did you do to resolve those concerns that you had before you went to the lengths of voting opposed?
I researched them. So I studied it out in my mind and in my heart, as the scriptures teach us to. And the studying it out in my mind was the most important bit, because your heart tells you that, well, you should probably still sustain them, because, you know, why wouldn't you?
So we've got a sort of a model of how this can be handled with somebody in a position of authority in the church, in that we've got the Paul H. Dunn experience of somebody who was caught, found to be fabricating narrative, let's put it that way, of what had happened to him and his life experiences, and relatively benign, supposedly faith-inspiring sort of talks, and yet it was dealt with in a certain way once that was highlighted. What you have done is given them an opportunity, as have many people, let's face it. They've been called onto the carpet and said, we know that what you've said there isn't factually accurate, and you need to go through the repentance process like every other mortal person on this planet. Admit you were wrong, say you were sorry, make amends where you need to, don't do it again.
Yeah.
And we don't see that being modelled.
No.
I think what I'm getting at is this wasn't, when you voted opposed, this wasn't the first time any of your church leaders had heard that you might have concerns, right?
No. Yeah, it came about through a Temple Recommend interview, first of all, and then, before I was even voting opposed in person, I would just, after at general conference, I would say, oh, by the way, this is my opposing vote because of X, Y, and Z, and we'd meet to talk about it. But then I started voting opposed in person, and I have done it every opportunity pretty much that I can to be there in person and vote opposed, because it's important. And sorry, go on.
Sarah, you were going to ask a question?
No, carry on, Nemo, carry on.
I was just going to say, it's evolved, and this is the interesting thing. The second time I voted opposed, my stake president said, oh, well, I don't really need to meet with you because things haven't changed. And actually, what is terrifying, actually, is that every time I vote opposed, they've done something else. Yeah. I've uncovered another lie. They've lied again. Or with the SEC fine, all of a sudden you find out that not only were they lying to the members of the church, they were, lying to the government about the size and nature of their assets. They every time. So I can go to my state president and say, well, actually, no, I'm not voting opposed for the same reasons. Those reasons haven't been resolved, but there's more. There's more.
Yeah. I want to ask this question that because I feel like part of the key to what I want to ask ultimately is around resolving the issues. Angie's asking or making the statement, no leaders want to hear members' concerns, really. What was your experience of that? Were you supported in your concerns? And also, really the thing that's in the back of everyone's mind, not just were you supported in your concerns, would it be easier just to bugger off? Like I mean, most people just leave, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me about those two things.
So for those that don't know, I won leader roulette. We talk about leadership roulette in the church, and you've either got a bishop who's very receptive, or you can have bishops who are very hardline, and I've got a very receptive bishop. My stake president was a shining example of what to do up until he destroyed a letter that Download Jokes had sent that I never got a chance to read, and now he's completely ignoring me. Ever since the SEC story has broken, he doesn't want to talk to me about this at all. So when I register my next opposing vote, we'll see if he will come to the table and we can talk about it, because it's important. Anyway, so I was supported, and ultimately the thing that was coming forward from the leaders was, we don't know the answers to these questions. We're really sorry. And that's what led me to kind of push to the heights of going to the 12 and going to the First Presidency and getting some of the answers from there, was that everyone at this lower level was saying, oh, well, sorry, we can't speak to it. So I said, well, I'll just go to the people who can then. And that then worked.
So again, just to double down on that, and then I'm going to come to
Sure.
Sarah. So why don't, if you don't want to sustain your leaders and the problems are so big, the question that we keep being asked is, why don't you just leave?
Well, because
are you just trying to piss people off, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Okay, yeah, no, I get that. well, who else is going to hold them accountable?
Mm.
If something wrong is happening, who else is going to hold them accountable but the members of the church? Because the outside world don't really care unless they're breaking the law, as we, or looking like they were, breaking the law. You got to be careful what you say around the SEC settlement. But unless the law is involved and a settlement amount of money is involved, that's what the media care about. Or if they've hurt someone. So, but they are hurting the members, but not in as obvious a way. So you've got an abuse case, the media will cover that. A large amount of money is involved, the media will cover that. Money and abuse, those things sell newspapers, the media care. Outside of the church, no one cares if they're just not being honest with the members of the church. I can tell you no one cares because I have reached out to the Salt Lake Tribune on multiple occasions saying, here's what's gone on with Dan Lake Jokes. Here was his response to a 3,500 word document outlining dishonesty amongst him and his fellow apostles, prophets, seers, and revelators. Not a dicky bird. They don't care. They don't care about the fact that church discipline, according to the handbook and scripture, should now be actioned against the senior leadership of the church over the SEC fine. Again, they don't care about that. So no one cares other than the members of the church. And some people choose to leave because they just want to get out of the system where these things are going on. But if everyone that sees the problem leaves, then you just have a load of people that don't see the problem still being hurt by it and not realizing. That's why I think it's important to not just leave. But I'm lucky that I can be in that position. That's not healthy or right for everyone. So some people do just need to leave,
Yeah, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? That if you say people who are disgruntled will leave the church, well, yeah, of course they will, because there's no mechanism to stay faithful and leadership be held accountable. Mm-hmm. And as just regular Joe members, you expect to be held accountable for your actions by your leadership, by God. That's the whole point of the trial that is life, to repent and do better, to repent and do better. So when the leadership don't model that as a realistic part of the process of being human and alive on this planet, the faithful just feel bewildered, because what are we supposed to do when somebody isn't living up to those standards? And yet on the one hand, but they're just a mortal man, we just got to, they're fallible. But on the other hand, you're not allowed to hold them accountable for being fallible. Well, which one's the truth? Which one is it? Which is why faithful members do sometimes just stop being active, even if they still believe. Or people stop believing because how can we believe in an organisation where people can be so fallible, corrupt would be another word when it comes to the SEC ruling, and still claim to be exemplars of this faith that we all belong to. It's a really strange paradox to be sitting in, and I commend those that do feel strong enough to vote opposed, because I think it's lovely if you get a congregation that support that. But I know how I would have viewed that when I was active, and I would have probably not been the kindest, most generous person.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot about voting opposed, and it's a very powerful mechanism for us to hold the church to account. The problem with it is the church are not honest about how many people are voting opposed. And when you do vote opposed, it rarely becomes known to anybody outside you and your stake president. I had an experience, October 2021. I'd been talking to my stake president in a different state to the one I'm in now, for some time, about the problems that I was experiencing at church, the things that I was unhappy with, the things that I felt were harmful, were not safe, were absolutely not Christ-like in many situations. And we'd had, and I was thinking, well, sometimes people are voting opposed, because I knew people that were, but it didn't seem to be getting any recognition. It didn't seem to be any acknowledgement that anybody ever did anything, except basically a party game where Simple Simon says, put your hand up, and everyone does this. And it just seemed to be that it was a party game. The speaker says, put your hand up, and everyone does it. Like Stepford Wives reunited, whatever. So during the COVID, I think it was October 21, when we still went back in person for general conference in stake centres or anywhere else like that, I silently, in the quiet of my own home, voted opposed. And I then contacted my stake president and put in writing to him just why I had voted opposed. And I explained the concern I had around the false information that was being given to people within the church, things like Prop 8, not a penny of church money was spent on it when we know millions were spent on it. Things like the November policy, where we were told it was a revelation, and then the church realised just how unpopular it was, and just that they hadn't railroaded everybody into becoming more homophobic, hate, and all the rest of it. They realised it had to change, and all of a sudden it was a policy, not a revelation, and rescinded. Problems around finances, and just why do they think it's a brilliant idea to go and build a temple in Haiti when actually they could do with clean water and schools and medical services and stuff like that. And I just said I really had concerns about a lot of these issues that the leadership of the church were not answering and were not being honest in talking to us about. Now, my stake president was absolutely superb, and we sat and we met on a few occasions and we talked about the concerns I had, we discussed them. But he promised me that he would send that letter to the Quorum of the 12. He promised me that he would forward it and that he would come back to me with a response. So I went back to him 2 or 3 times and said, have you had a response? Oh, no, I haven't. And so that's really frustrating. Then roll forward to when they separated our stake because of the exceptional growth of the church. They decided to dissolve a stake and then realign boundaries, and we moved into another stake. And at that stake conference, actually totally unknown, I ended up sitting next to another one of our fabulous Brit Vengers. Neither of us knew the other was going to be there, and neither did either of us until seconds before it came realise there was going to be a sustaining vote because it was a stake conference. And we both looked at each other and thought, didn't know this was going to be a sustaining vote. And we both looked at each other and thought, I just can't be honest and authentic with myself and say I sustain these people who are lying to the membership of the church, hiding factual information, refusing to listen to our questions and take them seriously, and think that they have no need to give any accountability for themselves in how they behave to us. So we both voted opposed. Now, that in person, we did that. And I think because it was because they were merging stake boundaries, it kind of, I think it just went under the radar and didn't get picked up or noticed, which was problematic. But at the end of that, after we voted opposed, several people came up to each of us individually, gave us a hug and said, thank you. And that was really interesting to me. And one sister gave me a hug. She said, thank you. She said, it needs somebody to do that. And I know the other Brit Venger that was sitting next to me had exactly the same reaction. Now, a couple of days later, I had somebody phone me up from my ward and said, there's a rumour going around the stake about you. I said, seriously? I said, what rumour is this? And she said that you voted opposed. She said, but I don't think you'd do anything like that, would you? And I said, well, I said, let's talk about that.
Have you met Sarah?
You know, I said, let's talk about that. She was blown away. She was absolutely amazed. She was like, so you really you did? I'm like, yeah. She said, I've been telling people I didn't think you'd have done that. I said, oh, well, this is why. So, but interesting experiences though. We used the vote, as Nemo said, vote opposed, try to hold the leadership of this church for some accountability. And yet at the end of it, there's nobody coming back and saying, you know what, we're listening to your concerns. Across the world, X people have voted opposed. X people have made us aware that they're really struggling with this or with that, whatever they're struggling with. And we've realised that we need to have some discussions and talking about that. It's not happening, is it? So it's how do we use that vote opposed in a way that becomes much more public, much more focused, and how do we actually really see the best outcome from it? Because we're using it to get the leaders to listen, but they're trying to kind of ignore it a little bit and not actually be very public about, in the, I don't know, well, in the London stake this year, 70 people voted opposed. Therefore, giving the message to everybody else in the church, hey, there is an opportunity to voice your opinion, to say, I'm not happy with the direction we're going in. And there's a safeguarding bit to this whole voting opposed bit that we'll come to a bit later as well.
Stick a pin in that just now. Ruth, you were going to say something.
So, I'm quite cynical. The church is a corporation. It literally is a corporation. And there is one owner of this corporation who is the current president of the church, whoever that might be at any given time. We have general conference and we see ourselves as somehow shareholders with a vested interest. The reality is we aren't. There is one person that is in charge of this corporation, and it's what we are is customers in a supermarket, and they might occasionally ask our opinions. They might send out a survey and say, do you like the cornflakes or not? But they genuinely don't care about our opinion about how they're running things, is my take on it. We're not shareholders who have an opinion, have an ability to sway how they do things. That's the metric that we're getting from the votes that are happening and what they're doing as a result of it. They don't care.
And
So,
I think,
sorry.
Ruth, just to pick up that, you're saying they don't care. I think what they're not hearing is that those of us that vote opposed do care.
Well,
we care very much, and that's why we're voting opposed, because we care very much.
But the people like me who just go, stuff it, I'll go shop somewhere else, walk out. The people like you guys are saying, I believe in this and I think it can do better. And I love you enough, dear leader, to offer you the same repentance process that I know I benefit from. So I'm going to oppose you. It's harsh. It's tough love. I know that. That's called repentance. That's the process we all buy into and we all believe in as active members. I'm going to offer you that because I love you enough to tell you when you are wrong. And unfortunately, they see that as more just more of a challenge to them than me walking out the door. They're happy for me to go quietly. They're not happy for you to stay and actually make them feel uncomfortable. That's on them. That's not on you guys.
It's like any abusive relationship. They'd rather you leave them than challenge them.
Of course.
They'd rather you weren't there at all and they could just pick on someone else who didn't put up a fight. You know, I agree. The idea that we make this some public thing, the immediate argument to that, Sarah, from a belief perspective would be, well, hang on, this isn't a voting system. This isn't about, they call it a vote, but this isn't a vote. This isn't, if there's so many people voting opposed, then this person will be removed. It is an opportunity for people to bring forward information that should it be true, would preclude the individual from serving in that calling. Which is why my stake president always said to me, well, the sort of lies that you've described, if they were being done by a bishop or by a Relief Society president, I wouldn't release them from their calling. So then when I sent him a text saying that, well, hang on, the senior brethren of the church just cost the church $5 million and hid $32 billion of sacred tithes, are you telling me that if a ward clerk or bishop or Relief Society president had done that with church money, that they wouldn't be facing church discipline? Because if that's the bar, if it's okay, this is what opposing votes are about. It's about bringing information forward that would preclude someone from being in that role. Then yes, it doesn't matter how many of them there are. It only takes one. If the system's being followed properly, it should only take one opposing vote to have someone removed from their calling. If the information they bring forward is true, it can be verified as true, and what they've told everyone would preclude that person from serving.
Well, could we stick a pin in that idea? Because I want to tie that into something we're going to bring Sarah in with in a minute. But are opposing votes just basically something that goes and dies. We're only interested in the fact that sustaining happens. Are they recorded? Sarah had put it in writing. You've put yours in writing. You've had lots of discussions about it. Is anyone paying attention?
The local leaders will, because they're worried about the effect it has on on the local members seeing this sort of dissent. The history of opposing votes is interesting, very, very briefly, in that at the beginning of the church, when the church was in its infancy, these things mattered and they applied to everyone. Whereas now, what they are essentially, they've become this faith-affirming motion that people just go through. They're just this routine that people go through to say, "Yeah, I'm still on the right team. Yeah, I'm still on the team. I'm still one of you lot." And so the opposing votes are there just to give the image that it's what it used to be, even though it clearly isn't anymore. And so, yeah, that's why they've batted it down to local leaders to take care of. They used to be, back in the day, when you voted opposed at the conference centre, you'd get taken aside by an apostle and they'd chat to you about why, and they'd resolve your concerns or whatever the case may be. That just doesn't happen anymore. And they'll say, "Oh, it's because the church is too big." But again, you look at it from a safeguarding point of view. It only takes one person to say, "I know that man's a sex offender and he should be removed from the prospective calling in primary that he was going to have, or the calling in youth, or whatever it was, a calling where he'd be in a position with vulnerable people." It should only take one opposing vote, because that was the original intent of the system, is to bring those things to light, to make sure we have eyes and ears across the entire church. Let's see what's going on, because we can't know everything. And even though that kind of undermines discernment, and we could get into that whole thing, why can't they just know? It's a pragmatic way of getting people to put information forward.
I think that circles really nicely to, Sarah, what you were saying about the testimony given to the Charities Commission about the role that the opposing vote and sustaining vote plays in safeguarding people within the organisation. Do you want to?
Yeah. I think it's really important that when the church solicitor, who leads the church helpline, gave evidence to the public inquiry on child sexual abuse in religious settings, one of the things that he spoke about around, yes, the church know all about DBS checks, but we don't use them. And actually, you need to recognise that we do lots of other things that make sure that we're only putting people in a position when it's safe to do so. And one of the things he said that really highlights to me that we should consider safeguarding when we're thinking about an opposing vote. He spoke about members of the church are not recruited either by word of mouth, personal recommendation, or sought by advertisement, but are called to serve from the ward in which they live and where they worship after thorough searching interview. I would dispute that bit. That doesn't happen. And after their name has been presented and sustained by the entire membership of the congregation of that ward. So they're putting names forward to serve in various positions, and everybody's just sitting there and going, yes, that's okay, we'll do that. But actually, we are voting to put people in positions with children and vulnerable adults, and we have no knowledge that they have been trained, that they have been background checked, that they are a safe and suitable person who we would sustain and trust and leave with our most vulnerable community members. So, and we're led by a leadership that don't seem to understand the importance of this. They seem to think it doesn't really matter that much, so they can take months and months and months doing nothing and years doing nothing because it's not a priority for them. And I think, for me, that's a consideration. Can I possibly sustain the core of the 15 if they are not prioritising throughout the church across the world the importance of safeguarding our most vulnerable children and our most vulnerable adults? And if they're not prepared to take a direct action to ensure that that is done, do they deserve my sustaining vote? And could I give it with absolute authenticity and honesty and meaning? Could I offer that sustaining vote? And that's a huge consideration for me as we approach General Conference this time round.
Let me just see if I can summarise what certainly my takeaway is from that. Church lawyer, in evidence to a UK national inquiry on the subject of abuse, in sworn testimony, he lets the inquiry know that the way one of our safeguarding measures in the church is the process of sustaining, and that were someone to have any concerns about an individual who is called, who's in the congregation, one of the ways that they would be able to express concern is to not sustain that person. How does he phrase that?
Yeah.
It's basically to withhold your,
Well,
because he doesn't spell it out.
he
Does
said
he?
no, he didn't actually mention the word opposing, because
Right.
let's not encourage that. But what he did say was the person is presented for a sustaining vote. So by
Right.
implication, by inferring, actually, they sustain him, but you know, they
And
don't have to sustain.
therefore, yeah, therefore, when someone is brought before the congregation, when that name is brought before the congregation as a person who is presented to serve in this calling at whatever stage, however long they've been serving, as a safeguarding measure, we are being told that by implication, voting opposed is one of the ways we could express a concern. Have you ever heard that before? Up until you had read that, is that?
I find that incredible, because I find that what he's saying in that statement to a very important investigation was that we are the backstop as ordinary members. We are the backstop in safeguarding, and our ability to sustain or by inference oppose is the way we keep predators out, is the way that we keep criminals out. We keep, abuse out of our organisation, and we don't need to do DBS checks, because ordinary members, every vote matters, every voice counts, and it only takes, like you saying, Nemo, only one person, if they said, do you know what, I know something that would stop them, that should preclude, that will kickstart the process, and we won't have that person sitting in the wrong situation. That is incredible. If that were a system that works, does that happen? Absolutely not.
Well, you know what?
How dare they think that actually ordinary church members should be given that responsibility anyway, where they have no systems to back it up? But it doesn't work, because even if they called somebody to primary on Sunday morning, and 10 of us put our hands up and said we oppose, unless they felt like it, they would not change the call to that person.
I don't know. I feel like on a local level, the opposing vote system works better. I don't think it is at all an adequate substitute for background checks or for proper safeguarding policy or for any of that. But I do think, if I think about wards I've lived in, if I put my hand up and I said, no, I know that man's on the child sex offenders register, they would say, right, off he goes. No, but it's not my responsibility as a member. It's not my responsibility as a member to know that and to have to put that out. They can just check that list themselves.
Yeah.
Right. That's it's an extra way of checking with members, but there are procedures in place that they should be using.
Right, but I'd like to push this further, because what isn't mentioned in Brother Ford's testimony, also, the testimony that he has provided is incredibly helpful, and I'm really grateful that the church did provide testimony, so that there's really interesting things in there. We'll put a link to that testimony up so that you can have a look. This is really important for members to know. We aren't presented this information that, oh, you can use this if you do have any concerns. What's presented to us is the expectation is that this is an opportunity to sustain. I exactly like in the comments, and Ruth is saying that this is a loyalty test for me. I want to be the good girl. I want to be affiliated as a Mormon, and I love the prophet. I want to sustain. The problem is that you have voted opposed, Nemo. My brother is in the comments, and if he wants to batter me for calling him out online, then please go ahead later on. We're used to childhood scuffles, but my brother Rab is asking about this. What is it like when you vote opposed? Is the congregation
okay, sure.
What happens?
And I think this is where I delineate again between the two types, because voting
Yes.
opposed to the senior leadership of the church is one thing, and is arguably more significant to people. If it's
Hmm.
like so and so is being called as the primary president and someone votes opposed, it's a different kind of shock because everyone knows that person. They're like, oh, so what does he know about her that I don't know? That's it. That's a different thing. And like I said, I think that's treated differently. But again, shouldn't be relied upon to keep people safe, because what if I don't want to rock the boat? What if the one person in the room that knows isn't the sort of person that wants to put their hand up in front of loads of people and be the one to single them out and say, I have a problem? Yes, they could go talk to the church leader afterwards, but it's just not well set up. Anyway,
It,
what's it like? Oh, go on.
I can say it is, and also if the church want to give official testimony to a public inquiry to say that that is one of the robust systems that they authorise and they recommend and they implement,
Hmm.
then we should be taking much more responsibility about whether we think the people responsible for the direction and leadership that this church takes as a whole are actually able to do so
Hmm.
effectively,
Yeah.
just around that one issue.
Yeah, and I think we need to re-examine the word robust if they think that that's a robust system, because it's not. Anyway, so what's
And
it
also,
like?
just before you
Hmm.
continue, Nemo, on
Hmm.
what's it like, just you, am I right in saying you voted opposed to the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12
Yeah.
at an area and local level you sustain?
Hmm.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. So, okay. So what has it been like opposing at that level?
I mean, well, that gets you some grace as well, because my local leaders realise that it's not about them. They're not the problem. This is over their heads. Um, and I have a member who comes up to me, and you can tell they're uncomfortable with me voting opposed, but they say, well, thank you for sustaining your local leaders. That's their line to me every time. um, but I've had people come up as well. I've had a bishop come up and say, thank you for voting opposed. They shouldn't ask that question if they don't want people to voice their concerns if they have them. So he's pushing that line and saying, actually, don't ask the question if you don't want an answer. A lot of people don't view it that way. The video footage of me voting opposed that's out there online, and some of the stuff that isn't online yet, shows that people turn, have conversations with each other. Oh, you see what's going on? You can feel it in the room. This latest time I voted opposed, I was stood on the stand directly behind the state president. So I was singing with the state choir, and I promise I didn't put myself in that position. That's where they told me to sit. uh, was right behind the state president. I thought, oh,
Never again.
yeah, they're not going to do that. They're not. That serves them right for making me sing tenor. That's their fault. So I was behind the state president and I stood. I said, I oppose, and that footage will come out soon over the course of this weekend. But you'll see me stand, and that's the first time I've done it where I can see all 300 people or whatever it is in the stake center, all looking back at me, going, what's just happened? Because it takes a moment, and I was determined. It doesn't look like it in the video, but it feels like an eternity when you're doing it. I was determined not to sit down until the state president had acknowledged it. And because I've done it before, he acknowledged it very quickly. He was like, yep. Because he saw me as he came in, he clocked that I sat on the stand, and he knew. He's like, right, okay, this is going to happen today. So he knows, and he's now trying to just be like, oh, Nemo, what are you doing? And trying to kind of fob me off as though it's not very serious, when in actuality, it's very serious. So if he's watching this, I would implore him to return my text messages, phone calls, and emails, please.
As someone who has seen what, we got to, Brit Vengers have special privileges.
Well,
We
a couple of
get
the
to,
Brit Vengers were there,
well, exactly,
came
right?
along to
But
support me, yeah.
having seen the footage, um, as a person who's been a sustainer, I thought it was incredible. You're modeling how this looks, and there is an anger, there is an, people aren't trying to tackle you to the floor.
Hmm.
It was noted, and it was, I felt it was a really special moment. Um, the problem that I have is that if we're suggesting then that we have this almost backstop that a member can sustain, that a member can oppose the calling of a local leader. What isn't mentioned in Brother Ford's testimony is that we fear ostracization if we were to do that. We fear getting into trouble. We fear it being public in the first place. Now, while there are opportunities to have those conversations privately, I do appreciate that. However, we're a community who fears this. Now, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the reception that, for example, you, Sarah, have had, that Alana's had. Can you speak a little bit to when you first voted opposed?
Yeah.
What was that like?
The very first time was slightly nerve-wracking, I have to say. And it started off in person at ward conference. But I'm always sat right near the front. I always make sure to make sure that I can be seen. And so there's this feeling of kind of everyone behind you, and everyone else is. And if you've ever been there for a vote, a sustaining vote, you know the sound, the sort of unanimous rustling of suit jacket sleeves and clothes, just shh, shh, sort of thing. And then when they say any opposed, and you stand up on your own and say I oppose, and then sit back down, and then you hear what was just quietness becomes a little murmur, a little rustle behind you, and it's a bit unnerving. But then the second time you do it again, then you go to state conference, do it there, and then it starts to just become routine, and I'm trying to desensitize both myself and others to it, that this is just a normal thing. This is, get used to it.
Desensitize. So have you had the death stares? Have you
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I remember after my first time doing it at state conference, I sent an email to the state presidency, the High Council, and all auxiliary presidencies, so the primary presidency, the research presidency, because some of the sisters that were sat on the stand were just staring at me. And I said, if looks could kill, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because the sisters on the stand would have done me in. And one of the only people to reach out and call me on the phone was the Stake Relief Society president, I believe it was, who called me up and said, I'm really sorry that if anyone made you uncomfortable, you have a right to do that. And that's absolutely your right to do that. So I'm sorry that happened. You will see in the footage, I'm probably going to blur their face, but other members of the choir were really kind of digging into the back of my head with their eyes after my most recent opposing vote, because I'd spent weeks rehearsing with them. They had no idea I was going to do this. This person that they thought was just one of them, a normal member of the church, all of a sudden is this terrible human being who would just dare voice an opinion slightly different to theirs. And the poetic irony is that I just spent time singing in harmony with them, and now my voice was not in harmony with theirs. And there's, you can read into that all you like, but that was possibly slightly jarring for them. And I had one person.
I don't know. I thought from seeing the footage, and obviously everybody's gonna get to see it this weekend or whenever you put that out. But I reckon that they did pretty much what I do, is just looked like, oh. And there's not a lot of things to look at during conference. It's not exactly entertainment central, right? And you did something unusual. I didn't get hate vibes from them, but then I don't know. I'm not in there.
Yeah, like
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I think if I were a youth, I'd be thinking this just got 10 times more interesting.
Right?
So I was sat next to I was sat next to a member of the state presidency, his kids. And so like you've got these primary and youth, one of them primary, one of them youth, sat next to me. And they were kind of like, oh, okay, because I'd been singing in the same section as them, walking them through the notes, been like, okay, right, we're doing this bit, this bit, this bit. And then all of a sudden, again, this person that was like, this example, all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's he doing? That's different. That's strange. But they were fine. We continued to joke with them. I cracked a joke I can't remember what it was, but a member of the stake presidency laughed during someone's talk. I made a joke, and so they remain quite jovial with me about the whole thing because I make as much of a fuss as is necessary, but no more, and I think they
Well, as
appreciate
long
that.
as it wasn't loud laughter, although
It
that is
wasn't
now
loud
back on the
laughter.
table. But
You can laugh loud now.
You're allowed to do
Laughing
that,
loud
yeah.
is okay.
It's
Yeah.
okay. You're
yeah.
allowed to do that now.
It's all
Yeah,
good.
we had an update.
So maybe that's the answer. We don't vote to oppose. We just laugh really loudly when they suggest.
Right.
Oh,
people.
There is that. So I want to come back to something that we spoke about a little bit earlier, and that is Sarah, you did something that fascinates me. You put your opposing vote in writing to make sure that it was recorded. I've never heard of that.
well, we put that letter up on our webpage later, so it'll be there if people want to read it.
Great
I mean,
idea.
it will be a slightly different letter this time, but some of the issues will be the same.
So you're
The
going to do it
reason-
again?
Yeah. The
Okay.
reason, well, yeah, the reason I put it in writing was because I wanted to have absolutely no. I didn't want the state president to say, "Oh, somebody in my state voted opposed," and to water down what I was saying, because I think there's a problem where leadership try to water down difficult messages because they don't want to. It's almost like they fear being the messenger of bad news and being labelled for bringing bad news to the leadership of the church. And I wanted to be very, very clear. These are the concerns I have. These are the things that I think need an answer and need some responsibility and accountability. And I just wanted to have it there as a record. And yes, it's a record that can stand against me, but it's a record that I actually think can stand as testimony that actually the church can do better, and the church should be doing better. So put it in writing the first time round, and when I wrote the letter and sent it, and sort of looking at it, thinking, okay, click send, just send it. Then there was that scary moment, and the state president came back to me, and he said, well, first of all, I wrote to him and said, I voted opposed. And and he came back and he said, thank you for letting me know. I'd like to understand your reasons. And I thought, that's great. He was interested enough to ask, what are your reasons? And I said, well, it's an attached letter. It's all in there. And we met a couple of times and went through it. I think it's got to be in writing. I think there's a power in forcing somebody to read your written word as well as hearing what you say to them. I think there's a power there.
Do we just really like letters? Is it maybe? Is it maybe we're just...
I personally am a big fan of letters, I have to say.
Yeah, it's a 21st century definite thing. I mean, we're probably due to send another letter out to people soon, one of these days. We just haven't quite worked. We'll think about that.
If we have something to say, we might. Sorry,
I was
go.
going to say a little update for the viewers is that the letters that I sent to the bishops and stake presidents of the first presidency, they are they've arrived in the United States. They're in the local delivery office, so they're likely to be delivered tomorrow, just in time for conference.
Superb.
Excellent.
I mean, I guess the fact that conference is happening this weekend is I am struggling with this. This is a personal thing for me. I wonder, Ruth, as someone who doesn't attend, but your name is still in the church records, is that right?
Yeah.
You have an unused vote, and you've just stepped back from church. I guess I'm wondering if people wrote, if they used their vote in that way, do you think there would be any impact? Do you think it would make any difference?
As in to go just to vote?
As in to even, to go to just to vote, or to write, to register, or have their vote registered.
Yeah.
Whether that's sustaining or opposing.
Well, Richard's saying in the comments, sell your vote, Ruth.
You can buy anything in this world with money, Ruth.
I'd give it away. Give it away for a bag of crisps, me. I think, so a little bit like what I was saying before, I actually think the voting oppose, voting sustain is the last hope for the faithful. And I think it's, if you're a believing faithful member, it's your last, it's the checks and balances of the system that are in place. Because if you believe in accountability, and you believe in repentance, and you believe that that we're all here and we're all fallible and we're on a journey to try and improve, then being able to say this person needs to be held accountable for something that they've done wrong and gone through that process is really, really valuable. For myself, if I feel like my ability to vote, well, I wouldn't sustain. My ability to vote to oppose would be viewed as sour grapes or something like that, just because I don't want to play by their game anymore anyway. I feel like it wouldn't hold as much validity in their eyes, and I might be wrong there. Maybe it would still count. I don't know, but it comes back to that sort of shareholders, and this being an AGM rather than a general conference. They don't think of us as shareholders with a vested interest in this, in the growth, or they genuinely don't care of those of us that have left, and I generally don't think they would care if I walked back in the door and said, "You're getting this wrong, guys." They just think, "Jog on, we don't care what you think."
So I'd push back on that in the way that I would challenge them on that. If I turned up having not been to church for 5 years, I was like, well, hang on. You always claim to care why people leave. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
This is my opportunity to tell you, because there's a problem with senior church leadership. You go back and you say, well, hang on, I do still have a voice, so I'm going to tell you. And the third point, I think the most crucial point, is you say, does it matter? Because it doesn't matter according to the handbook. Does it matter whether I'm a member of this church or not, a believer in this church or not, if I have information that indicates those people should not be in their callings? Take it away from the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 for a moment. You take it back to a local level. It shouldn't matter if you've been to church for 5 years, 10 years. If you hear from your friend that so-and-so is going to be sustained as a primary president, and you know they've got a history of abusing children, your vote should matter, even if you've not been to church for 10 years. So that's what I would be telling them when they're saying, oh, but you don't really come to church, or this or that, or when they try and do that in a soft way, when they try and ignore you, you push back on that and go, hang on, no, because my concerns, the reason I'm voting opposed, is more important than who I am or whether I come to your building very often or not.
Yeah, and I agree. And but I think the reality, the ground roots reality, is that voices are only backed up by your faithfulness, and faithfulness is demonstrated by attendance and paying your tithing and doffing the cap to the leadership. And I know that that's the way the system works. I was part of it. I frowned at the people that seem to not play by the rules myself. So I don't know how powerful my vote would be. I would love the opportunity. And it's shadow statistics, isn't it? I would love the opportunity to say to them, these are all the missing voices, the voices that should be there, and the reasons we're no longer there. They're the statistics they don't want to gather. They don't want to know. They want to make up that information about why we no longer attend, rather than actually interrogate the information and say, what's gone on here? What could we have got so horribly wrong that people are leaving in their thousands? Active, believing, faithful, long-standing members are leaving in their thousands. What did we do wrong? They don't ever want to look at themselves as an organisation. But I'd love that. If they wanted to ask, I would happily tell them. Our experience, having no longer attended for a few years now, is that even on a local level, nobody wants to ask that question.
I think there is a problem that a lot of leaders don't want to know. Some will have the discussion but have no answers, and some want to have a watered down, weak discussion about it because it's too difficult. But one of the things, it's just worth discussing for a moment about what might hold people back from voting opposed. And is it the fear of stigma, of shame, of that social punishment that comes your way by doing something that is seen as outrageous and irresponsible and wrong by other members? We had our ward conference recently, And I struggled with, what am I doing about a sustaining vote here? What is my plan? Am I opposing? Am I going to pretend this isn't happening? What do I do? And I really struggled with what was authentic and honest for me. But one of the greatest concerns that I had in my heart, more than anything else, was I can do it. I've done it at state conference. I put it in writing. I can stand up. I can vote opposed all over again in the ward. What does that do to people who I want to listen to our voice about safeguarding? And that was my greatest concern, was if I stand up and I vote opposed, do they then think, well, we ignore everything she and her colleagues and her friends and everybody ever says about safeguarding because they're just wanting to oppose the church and be difficult about everything? And I really struggled hugely with that. So I took a way out that I'm still not 100% comfortable with, and I abstained. And had a discussion afterwards when my state president spoke to me afterwards and said, what is your relationship with the church like? And we had a long discussion about my relationship with the church. I abstained on that occasion. That is coming again round now for General Conference. And my view is I have huge support, love and respect for my local leadership. Bishop, state president, kind of area presidency a little bit, but certainly local leadership are absolutely there. The area presidency, I don't think, are being remotely responsible about the things that matter hugely to me in this church, which is equality, abuse, finances. So, but what I don't trust this church to do is to use any opposing vote by any of the 21st century saints and our friends in the rest of the Brit Vengers as a group to use that opposing vote to decide that they can then justify ignoring everything we say about safeguarding because we're just a group of troublemakers that don't deserve to be heard. And I fear them doing that because I actually fear the pride level is such that they would do that. But equally, there's an authentic, honest bit for me about what do I do. So it's a struggle. It's not a simple. It's a struggle.
There are a few people in the comments who have asked the question about not being a member, having their records removed, or having left the church for whatever other reason.
They can still vote opposed.
Right, it's supposed to be a public vote. That's what I was going to ask you about, Nemo. Because I would really love.
And I think
struggle with this. So
I think the justification for it is that old adage of, well, they're not just the bishop for the ward, they're the bishop for that whole geographic area, right?
Yes.
Which is an irony. You can say that about yourself when your building is open to anyone and it's open all 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In theory, like a lot of sort of Anglican buildings are, you go to the priory or wherever the minister lives and you knock on his door and say, oh, I'd like to go into the church, and he'll let you in. I've done it myself before. You can then say, well, I'm open to everyone. But when the only welfare or when fast offerings are only distributed to the members of your congregation, not to the broader area, and all these sorts of in-group, out-group behaviours that our church exhibits. I'm not sure you can say that. But that's my long-winded way of saying I think that's why non-members can vote, can come and raise concerns, because, in theory, that bishop, that state president, is the bishop and state president for that whole area. So if you are into the Mormon mind affected by their calling as well.
I
think we lost Jane.
I think she's just having a moment. There she is. I think you're right. I think there is a power behind that, and what we're doing then is saying we're saying put your money where your mouth is. If you're actually the bishop of an area, a diocese, whatever, however you want to view it, then you would be interested in everyone within that community having a vote and either sustaining you or letting you know if there's something that they are concerned about. And if taking on face value what Andrew Ford said at the inquiry, there we go, it's late. If we take on face value what he said, he expects us to do that. The church leadership expects us to do that, and want the wider community to do that as part of that safeguarding process, as part of just regular checks and balances process. Now, where I would say, where would I feel now if I knew of somebody who was abusive in my local area who happened to also be a Mormon, I just go to the police. I am not playing by those rules anymore. I am not waiting for them to do something. If I know something, I'm going to go to people who actually have the power and the authority to act.
And the willpower and the will.
And the willpower, who aren't volunteers. We flip-flop on this. Oh, they're just a volunteer. They're just fallible. But they're there by discernment, and they've got authority, and you've got to listen to them. Well, which one is it? You know, whatever I do, whatever our actions are, you spin it so that it doesn't. You don't have to act on the information. So if I knew of somebody, I wouldn't wait for the powers at church to act on that information. I would take it to somewhere that actually could do something with that information. Now, that's me. I get that faithful members still hope that the system will improve and that the system will allow it to, those backstops on the process to work. I don't know.
Thank you, Ruth. So as Sarah and I have spoken a lot about this over this past few weeks. When Alana first voted opposed last year, I want to emphasize that she wasn't alone whenever she did that. Not only did she have me, but she had another Brit Venger and friends who are Mormon Freedom Fairy, flew up from London to come and hold her hand while she did it. We find that as we find her and connect with our communities online, that if you have a desire to do that, you're not going to be alone. There's always going to be someone to support you and hold your hand while you do that. Once Alana had voted opposed, she had nothing but support. Members of the church had come outside to speak with her, to say that they love her, and people that she'd never met before, and honoured her ability to use her vote. I, at that time, voted sustain. I am really, really struggling. I know that for all of the things that people have stepped away from the church, all of the reasons people have had for doing that, all of the things that have happened throughout church history, I'm aware that it can be a bit triggering whenever I can take a position where I don't know, I do not know what to do with this. But I'm finally here. I'm finally in a place where I don't know that I can sustain my church leaders, certainly right now. I guess I want to underline the fact that people who vote opposed don't arrive overnight, that it's painful. It's something, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're brokenhearted, sometimes we don't express it in the way that the church would love us to express it, which is usually not at all. This really bloody hurts. And this conference, and I've got a ward conference coming up in a couple of weeks where I'm likely to vote opposed. And I'm okay with that because I know it's the right thing to do. And so what I want to ask the rest of the panel here, maybe we could kick off with Sarah, then Ruth, then Nemo, is to ask the question that we keep coming back to here in the comments, the question that people keep drilling down on. Does it make any difference? Oh, Sarah.
I think it makes a difference. It might only make a difference to the few people that we role model. You do not have to keep agreeing with things if you find them difficult and problematic. You can use your voice. It makes a difference if you just get to sit with one leader or two leaders and share your reasons for voting opposed, because you have at least, once they know something, they can never unknow it. And once members of the congregation see you voting opposed, they can never unknow that that is an option that you can do, and you can live and still be okay again the next day for doing it. So it's a really good role model. It's also a really good opportunity to sit with leaders and say, you need to listen, because once you have put it in writing and told them, they can never unknow it. So yes, it's a struggle, Jane, as you say. It's a huge struggle. I've struggled. I think I'm at my decision on what I'm going to do this weekend, but it's difficult. But I think it does make a difference, and I think people have to keep on doing it. And I understand the frustration of people thinking there's nowhere on this earth it works. I think if people keep on doing it, I think the very, very first trade unionists that went on strike in this country thought it wouldn't work. I'm pretty sure Emily Pankhurst thought it wasn't going to work. I'm pretty sure many people think a lot isn't going to work. When we started our safeguarding, we didn't think that we would have a safeguarding committee set up called by the area presidency. We didn't think we would upset the church to the extent the European North Area presidency were writing to every bishop and stake president in the country. We didn't think we were going to have as many incredible people come forward to share their stories and experiences with us.
I didn't think I was going to fall in love with one of the church lawyers, Sarah.
I didn't think I was going to have the absolute hots for the most badassest woman I've ever met in my life, but I have had the hots. I do. Anyway, we're there. But I think there are so many things that none of us thought. But somewhere along the line, we have to try. Somewhere, who was it who said? Was it Desmond Tutu that said, if you're silent in the face of oppression, you take the side of the oppressor? And that is not. Before 11 billion people tell me I've got that quote wrong, it's very paraphrased. But if you don't speak up when you see something wrong, then actually, what's it? And just one last comment. I read the most fantastic post on Facebook this weekend by Susie Orgenstein, and I have shared it on my Facebook page. And she was talking to somebody who had been supporting somebody around LGBT issues, and he brought out the point that if you claim to be an ally or a friend or a supporter of somebody who is fighting difficult issues, and you are not getting hit by the same stones that are hitting that person, you are not standing close enough. So maybe we just all need to stand a little closer while we all get hit with the same stones to try and move things forward.
We love you, Susie. Thank you so much for all the work that you do.
She's another badass.
Absolutely. Before I come to you, Ruth, Sarah, what interests me in the writing to register an opposing vote is the fact that you actually get to be quite boundaried with it. If you don't want to have a conversation about your reasons why, if you want to register your vote and not follow up and not have those discussions, if you want to stay off the radar, those things are open to you. You've got a lot of control while you do that, which I like. Yeah.
And there are email addresses now available to people that people can send email addresses and register their votes by that line and that avenue. If people wish to use email addresses to register opposing votes, Nemo. If people wish to simply send letters, people can do that to their local stake president, their bishop. I was invited for an invitation discussion, and I was happy to take that discussion up. But I think we shouldn't sit around thinking there's nothing we can do. There is something we can do to try and turn this church into something that is fabulous and safe. There is something we can do.
Yeah, I mean, we're being asked if you get to make your reasons public. I mean, in general, those conversations about voting opposed are supposed to be private, but we live in the digital age.
Unless you jump on a podcast. Unless you jump on a podcast, and then we can make them public. So,
Yeah, we highlight comments and things like that and invite people on the podcast, and my brother's awesome also, just to let you know. So not what I'm getting is that this is actually a really inclusive thing to do. So while we have the broad membership of the church who votes to sustain, and that's the socially accepted thing to do, we have people who can rock up at church and physically be there and do that really hard thing to vote oppose. And I know it's hard every time. It's not having been on Nemo on his journey. It's never ever easy. But also there are other things that if you wanted to go for the first time, even if you have had your name removed, if you have experienced church discipline, if you don't want anything to do with the church anymore, there are ways of exploring how you can use your vote. And I think that's what I'm really excited about tonight. And in fact, we're hearing that we have a church lawyer who's talking about it, certainly in the case of safeguarding, but safeguarding can become a broader issue, that if there is something you are concerned about, this is the mechanism which we use. Mormon Civil War, or Peter Bleakley will talk for hours on end about the theology behind that and the Doctrine and Covenants, and go check out his channel. But we have this mechanism, and I would find it really exciting just to see how people use their voices, or don't. Yeah, sorry, Sarah, before we come to Ruth.
Jane, can we pick up on this quote by Joy Kelson? Until you are out for long enough to not be afraid, the consequences of voting in opposition seem terrifying. How can those of us already out support members brave enough to vote opposed now? Well, I'll tell you, when I stood and voted opposed, I had a member of the Brit Ventures next to me, and that was great. But even though we sat side by side and quickly grabbed each other's hand and sort of went, I oppose, even though I actually felt my heart hitting my rib cage, it was beating that hard. I think there's an issue about how we show love and support and kindness, isn't it, to people who are kind of putting their head above the parapet. Can we pick up on that quote from that comment for a bit? And
yeah, absolutely. I know that when it comes to voting time for me, I would like to do it privately. Privately with my congregation, but yeah. You don't necessarily need a Brit Venger to fly out, although certainly, people are in the area. Everyone's happy to have a little day out here and there, I'm sure. I think it's about the empowerment to use their voice. And if we're having conversations around that. So I want to come to Ruth. What would you say? What's the answer to Joy's question?
So I think, and it ties in with what Joy said there, which is really powerful. What I'm realizing, the further away that I am, and you do get that sort of a better perspective, I think, as you step back and examine it with a little bit of distance and emotional distance as well, is that my ability to vote opposed is a privilege, and my ability to vote opposed is a sustaining vote for those people who may not have a voice, and is a sustaining vote for those people who have suffered at the hands of people in leadership positions and haven't felt they can stand up for themselves. We all know of instances where people have gone through the repentance process and now called to a position of authority, and they have victims sat in that congregation. And I think by sustaining, you are putting a knife in that victim who feels like they're somehow in the wrong now, because that person is back in a position where they can maybe commit abuse, maybe lie, cheat, do whatever they want to do. And I think the ability to say no is the same thing that you would do. You would advocate for a small child, wouldn't you? You would stop a bully and say, no, that's not happening. No, stop it. And I think we the heart stopping thing, I think, does happen when you perhaps you're doing it for yourself. But if you knew that you needed to be strong for somebody who was weaker or smaller or didn't have a voice, you we'd all be there, wouldn't we? So maybe we just need to reframe it in our minds. And if you feel like you want to be at church, you want to oppose, that's who you're doing it for. You're doing it for those that haven't got the strength to oppose themselves, but they are there, and they would love to have that ability to oppose.
And I think the other thing that is really hitting me tonight is the fact that this isn't, I mean, maybe sometimes it's going to be personal in that there is a personal issue or a personal barrier. Someone has obfuscated the truth, and that affects my ability to be able to sustain them in their role.
Yeah.
The other side of that, though, is that it may be that I completely love and sustain that person. I mean, we talk about how we've all won leadership roulette. We frequently talk about, our sainted state presidents. Sarah and I just are very, very lucky in that respect. But also, we're the primary president in my ward to be called and have a position where they're looking after children, and yet they're not DBS checked, and yet I still feel like there are problems with safeguarding and that risk isn't being managed within the organisation. That's enough to not sustain, despite me knowing and loving these people. It's not personal. Again, that's something that may be better taken up in writing, or it may be better expressed publicly, so that, as is mentioned by my brother earlier on, we are setting that example. People, youth who are coming up who are used to seeing things like this now, know that dissent doesn't have to be something that we're terrified of. So, Nemo, is this going to go anywhere?
Is it gonna go anywhere? I think it's one of several avenues available. I think I go back to my point about, if you look at even the total figures the church claims, I reckon the church will pass 17 million this conference, possibly. Someone was doing some analysis on Reddit earlier today about, at the church's current rate of growth, will they hit the 17 million mark this conference, or will they just miss it? And it looks like it could be a tight run race. So that's one of my predictions. Tune in on Friday for more. So, but take the 17 figure as a round figure and take the world population. Mormons, everyone that is currently on the records of the Mormon Church, makes up 0.02% of the world population. Small. So the world doesn't care. They care when there's a big story. They care when there's abuse going on that they can prove. They care about, but they don't care that the institution itself is corrupt and problematic. So it's up to members, and one of the tools available to members is the opposing vote system. And the way that's effective is it shows people, if it's not working, it shows people that it's not working. Members' shelves and members' kind of trust will crack when they realize, hang on, the checks and balances the church has instituted aren't sufficient. And that'll help members to see that the church does need outside help in managing its safeguarding and other sort of things like that. So that's why I think that's important, that lots of people are doing it. I think that other things like trying to get the public involved is also very important. But again, it's just such a niche topic. It's very tricky to sell it to a journalist. I've tried. Maybe I'm just not very good at it. If you're good at it, reach out, let me know. But it's a hard thing to get the world interested in.
Will it help or change the church? Will it help or change the system?
Oh yeah.
If members or people show up and use that vote.
Yeah, it will.
It will make a difference, won't it? Because they won't admit that that's what's made the difference. But give it 5 years, 10 years, we'll be looking back and the church will be telling us how they were inspired to make certain changes for these purposes. And hopefully people speaking up and advocating for others will be part of that process.
It made a difference. It made a difference when thousands of people resigned in the light of the November policy.
Yes.
Because, it got downgraded from revelation to policy so that they could get rid of it, so they could stop more people leaving. Yeah. But people registering their absolute outrage at such discrimination and such a harmful policy had an impact on the church then.
Mm-hmm. And in church history, we have examples of the general membership of the church voting no. We do have that. We have to search back quite a substantial amount of time, and these layers are sort of put in place. But yeah, I maybe it's just because, you know, democracy is something that's really important. I just love to see people using their vote, and I think it's important. But I mean, at least we said it. At least we said the thing. I'm going to come to everyone for closing comments, and before we close out for the evening, we just want to remind you. So, Mary is asking, the voting session of conference tends to be the Sunday morning. Is that right, Nemo?
No, it's the Saturday afternoon.
It's the Saturday afternoon. Yeah, this apostate has totally lost track. Yeah, so this tomorrow night I'm going to be hanging out with PD, the rest of the Brit Avengers, talking about our conference predictions. We do have predictions. We're quite excited to share. Then we'll be talking about the Sunday morning session with Nemo over on his channel. We'll be hanging out with the gang here next Wednesday, talking about our conference takeaways. And then the following week, we are hanging out with the wonderful David Osler. So as we close out tonight, Sarah looks like she's studying something, so I'll come to you next. So let's go Ruth, Sarah, and then Nemo, and we'll do your closing thoughts for tonight.
I probably won't drag myself up there to the chapel on Saturday evening, to be part of it, to vote. If I'm brutally honest, but I applaud anybody that does do this process. And hats off to those faithful people who want the system to work and want to have their voice. I applaud you, and I admire you. And if you need me to cheer you on, I'm there with pom-poms. I'll do it. I'll cheer you from the sidelines. I personally am happy to use me walking away as my votes on the whole darn lot of them, because I think the top leadership is emulating the worst character traits, and that filters down through and through. And if you do happen to have a local leader who's just a nice guy, that's great. But there are nice guys all over the world doing all sorts of things. Some of them happen to be Mormons, and I just feel so disappointed. I feel so let down by it as an organisation. I hope they really believed in what I thought they believed in, but I don't think they do, and I don't think the top leadership do. I don't think they like being held accountable, and I want to be around people who are honest and have integrity and stick to their values, which is why I love you guys, and I love, the people that sit in this space and put their head above the parapet and say, this organisation is important to me, and I've got the integrity to say, not in my name.
I love that. And I feel like for those leaders that we've got to experience that do have integrity, that do have the ability, sometimes they're as paralysed by the discomfort as we have been. We have all been. And they don't necessarily realise the power and authority that they have, that they are the people who can take these concerns and pick them higher up. To have Nemo the Mormon pick their butts and keep on poking at them to take it to the level where it can go, every one of those concerns, if they cannot be resolved, needs to be pushed higher up. And they generally have been going to state presidents' offices to die. I think a lot of that is because you maybe are nervous that you've not been able to resolve it, or what does pushing up your line mean? I don't know, but I do know there's a lot of ability to do more.
They now go to Brooke P. Hales's office to die. He's a 70, and I bet he cannot wait to go emeritus.
I think he puts it in
stop dealing with me.
Yeah, I think he puts it in the filing cabinet marked, "We're being persecuted." and
I think so. Yeah.
goes in the we're persecuted file.
Mm-hmm. Poor me.
Yeah.
I'm persecuted in my very expensive suit.
That's my conference prediction. There'll be some talks about how persecuted they are and how that's a sign of the last days and da 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 da. And I'll just get my little violin out and start playing for them.
I am just so sorry for the workload that Brother Hales is having to. You think as a secretary to the First Presidency, it's going to be meetings and schedules and flights, and
said it's Nemo.
You get Nemo.
When you have to do shorthand in Reformed Egyptian, it's just a really tough job, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard. It's harsh.
But I mean, my letter's been sent out. My letter about church discipline has been sent out to many stakes around the world.
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll come to that once Sarah said her remarks, but
yes, right. Let's jump to you, Sarah. What you're thinking as we close out?
I just want to read the last few sentences that I ended my letter with to my state president when I put my opposed vote in. And I put, so, and bearing in mind, I'd given all the reasons previously. So, President, that's how I feel about the current leadership. Not in my name, not with my consent. I don't want history to record that I stayed in a comfort zone bubble and failed to raise a voice of warning, a plea for the most vulnerable. I don't like conflict, but I will not follow as a sheep when the house is on fire, membership falling rapidly, needs ignored, and members marginalised for speaking up. It is only by continuing my approach of direct conversation with leaders when issues of concern arise to raise awareness and seek clarification that we can hope to see any change.
Oh, Sarah, I am just so sorry that you're brought to having to write that.
Yeah.
And it is beautiful and it is correct, and I stand with you.
That was 2 years ago. So we now see where I'm at 2 years on.
Oh.
But I think we put that letter. I think we put that letter link.
Yeah, we'll stick
do
it
something.
up online so
I don't know.
we
do something.
Nemo the Mormon, take us out.
Viva la revolution, as they say. I guess. Yeah, my letter. I've laid out that there is a doctrinal and handbook case for the First Presidency and the presiding bishopric to face disciplinary action. They absolutely should, for their part in the SEC scandal. More broadly, they should face disciplinary action anyway, or certainly over their dishonesty with members of the church, a pattern of dishonest behaviour that they've shown. Over half of them have said dishonest things in public, and they've shown that they're incapable of responding to the evidence, because Downley Church was assigned to investigate it and couldn't, or didn't want to. I don't know, but I would like to think that he kept his word and did what he said he would do. But my letter now calling for church discipline against those men is being sent far and wide. It's the east coast of the United States, a couple of stakes there, several stakes in Utah. Occasionally it'll just pop up on Reddit and someone will be like, oh, have you seen what everyone sent? Yeah, that was me. Someone's passed it along. And then, it's gone to multiple stakes here in the UK. And people are like, oh, okay, what does that do? It does a few things. And this is where I'd like to end with activism, because it affects people in different ways. You've got the members that end up seeing it, the people in your kind of mid-tier callings, your high councils, etc. They end up seeing it and exposed to it. Some of them didn't even know about the SEC problems. So you expose people to problems they didn't know exist. That's point number one. Every time an area presidency gets a stake president reaching out, because they tend to silo them, so all these different state presidents, each time they reach out to the area presidency and go, oh, I've had this email, oh, I've had this email, oh, I've had this email, it builds up a picture that, okay, a lot of people are concerned about this. And it puts pressure on that middle management to then escalate it or try and escalate it. And it only takes one of them to crack. It only takes a Hans Matson to realize that, hang on, my integrity is worth more than my calling, to go, okay, I'm going to do something about this. So there's that element of it. So it's all about exposure. It's all about exposing as many members as possible to the truth. And they will do with it what they will. And some will leave, some will stay, some will do something about it. So that's why activism is important, because you don't know who it's going to touch. You don't know who's going to hear the message. You don't know who's going to change their life for the better or try and change the church for the better as a result. So just keep speaking up and keep sharing stuff.
I love that. Thank you so much for the conversations that we've had tonight. And I guess I would close out by, I know it hurts when you've taken a step back from the church to hear members speak like this when so much has happened and it's not yet been a deal breaker. Believe me, I know that it can be really triggering. But I have faith in this church. I have faith in the leaders of this church. And that's why I have faith that if we've set up this mechanism to talk about the problems or to indicate that there is discomfort and that something's not okay, I feel empowered to be able to use that. And it terrifies me. And I love and want to sustain the prophet. This is not okay. And so for the first time, and I hope it's not for long, I'm going to be voting opposed. Because I feel like our church leaders will listen. I feel like there's a point, and that may be naive and completely hopeless, but do you know what? I'm going to do it anyway because this is what I signed up for. That's the takeaway that I hope that members have, that if you're voting sustain, I stand with you and hold your hand. And if you're voting opposed, I stand with you and I hold your hand. And I am so grateful that we can have conversations like this that are empowering and that aren't about tearing down the church, that aren't about building frustration or feeding negativity. It's about using our vote and exploring a system. I hope tonight has been empowering for you too. I wish you all a peaceful conference weekend. Don't forget that if it's too much to deal with, take a step back. But come hang out in the podcast because we tend to give you the TLDR version, and it is often way more fun than the real thing. So come hang out over the weekend over on Nemo the Mormon's channel and Priesthood Dispatches channel. And with that, we bless your journeys. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.